Welcome back to the channel, everyone. I'm Micah. The 60th anniversary of Doctor Who is coming up later this year. So I went back through all 150 episodes of the revival show. Today, we're going to review every single one of them. I'm counting two-parters and this one three-parter as one each. I'm going to go through every episode of this show in order, leading up to the 60th anniversary of this show. And at the end, I'm going to give you a ranking of all 150 of these stories, from worst to best. Yes, this is an hour-long video, as I am predicting. If you've seen this entire show, hopefully this is enjoyable. Let's get started. Doctor Who the movie. Paul McGann is fantastic. It's sad we didn't get more of him. The plot and other characters are terrible, but the 90s cheesiness is hilarious, and the 8th Doctor and sweet TARDIS interior make it fun enough. Series 1, Episode 1, Rose. Maybe I don't appreciate this episode as much as I should, because I didn't live through the dark ages when Doctor Who was just a laughingstock, but I don't think this episode is all that good. For the first episode of the entire show, the mannequin villains are so boring and the plot is actually dull, but the Doctor and Rose elevate it and are very entertaining. Eccleston is immediately believable and likable as the character. The end of the world. This future is more cringe than exciting. The creativity is almost there, but just not quite. And Cassandra is stupid, but the Doctor and Rose are good. The Unquiet Dead. An episode in the past just because they have to go to the past. It's mid. Definitely not bad, but pretty unspecial. Oh, and Charles Dickens is in it. Aliens of London and World War III. The Slitheen are horrible and stupid and annoying, but Rose coming back after a year is a nice idea. Mickey and Jackie are improved at least, but the rest of the story is meh. The humor is unbearable. 5 episodes into the series and it's still not good. But then a Dalek came along. Dalek. Actually makes a Dalek threatening for once, and all it needed was one of them. There's serious conflict and stakes for the first time, and the Doctor is amazing with the darker side post-Time War. We see that he has a long way to go in his character arc when he snaps at seeing a Dalek. This episode set the standard for all the character-based stories going forward. Truly great. The Long Game. Simon Pegg was in it and it was wasted. That annoying guy Adam Mitchell was causing problems, and seemingly nothing happened by the end. Father's Day. An essential time travel story finally brought to the show. Great Rose episode, great character work, memorable imagery, and an amazing sacrifice by Pete Tyler to set the timeline back. Such a satisfying story that explores the time travel paradox that seems like it should happen more often throughout the show. The Empty Child and the Doctor Dances. The environment and tone of this story really comes to life more than anything else in Series 1. The introduction of Jack Harkness is awesome, and of course the concept of the Empty Child is great dark sci-fi content. It all works, but that climax is the most essential victory for the 9th Doctor, where he's able to save everyone, making this one of the most iconic stories in the show. Moffat's great writing made an imprint on the show early. Boomtown. It made the Slitheen lady a better character, and even had an interesting morality conversation between the Doctor and the Slitheen. I like that it's a slower story without a giant threat, so not bad at all. Bad Wolf and the Parting of the Ways. Great futuristic dystopian concept in Bad Wolf, good character work all around, and an amazing cap to the 9th Doctor's arc when he chooses not to kill the Daleks. Add to it the sacrifice from Rose, which the Doctor takes onto himself. One of the best regeneration stories and finales. The Christmas Invasion. Had some filler in there, but it was fun. It was a genius idea to have Rose ease us into believing a new Doctor, and she is great for the first half, but then David Tennant is immediately a great Doctor. He spent most of the episode sleeping, yet he still carried in the end. His introduction is so fun. Series 2, beginning with New Earth. I still don't like the Skin Lady, but otherwise a very cool idea with the diseases. Just wish it could have been the Doctor and Rose the whole time without the body swapping. Better than the end of the world, at least. Tooth and Claw. Pretty tedious period piece with a very different vibe. It doesn't feel like they got the style of the historicals down yet. I don't care for the werewolf story, and it's very forgettable. School Reunion. I have no attachment to the old show, but Sarah Jane was great to see. The Doctor explaining why he leaves his companions behind was great too. The school plot is odd though, and K9 is stupid. Sorry. The Girl in the Fireplace. A perfect episode that's way more important than people realize. It's the future and the past rolled into one, and they go together beautifully. Madame de Pompadour was made a great character, and the episode perfectly shows how people see the Doctor and how he sees them. The Doctor comes when he's needed most. He represents hope, and he is worth the monsters and villains that come with him. But in the Doctor's perspective, humans age and die so fast, and he can't do anything about it. But he is forced to move on every time, leaving him lonely. That's how it's always been for him, but it is shown in an even more exaggerated way with this plot. This story was ambitious, it's emotional, it's clever, and it captures the whole spirit of the show and the Doctor's life better than maybe any other. Rise of the Cybermen and Age of Steel. The Cybermen are usually such a boring threat, but in their introduction, they're so much more interesting. In this, it's about how humans trying to avoid pain leads to hollow, emotionless beings, and they show the horror of it here. The alternate universe is also very interesting with the Tyler family, and Mickey is finally a great character in this story. The Idiot's Lantern. Very clearly a different and much worse writer than any other at the time. Rose didn't get anything to do, there's some shoved-in politics in there, and the villain was embarrassingly bad. Impossible Planet and Satan Pit. It's fine, but somewhat overrated. It's cool how they showed the devil as a villain outside of time, which contrasts with how the Doctor sees the universe, but it really doesn't work for me like it does for most. That climax is just too convenient. Love and Monsters. A gross, terrible parody episode. It's one of those ideas that never should have made it to the screen. It's just as bad as everyone says. Fear Her. I almost like this one, to be honest. It's a pretty cool idea of the drawings taking people and the alien controlling the girl. It's kinda underrated in Season 2. Army of Ghosts and Doomsday. The plot is very solid, and it's definitely epic enough for a finale with the alternate universe, the Cybermen, and the Daleks, but it's the ending and goodbye of Rose that elevates it way more. It's very well executed and emotional, truly the perfect send-off at the time for the first companion of the new series. The Runaway Bride. Donna was actually very good in her first episode, and the 10th Doctor had some very important moments after the departure of Rose. The Rachnos was not a good villain, but like the early episodes of the show, the Doctor and the companion carried the episode up to being good. Moving on to Series 3 with Smith and Jones. Finally a great season opener. It perfectly sets things up and pays them off in creative ways. It introduces Martha very well and makes her likable, and it's also through her perspective making it like we're meeting the Doctor all over again, but we also know where he's coming from. This episode was exciting and a great start to Season 3. The Shakespeare Code. A mixed bag. It's a better version of The Unquiet Dead as an episode in the past with witchcraft and a famous writer, but then it's just way too silly when the Muppet witches are literally defeated by words out of Shakespeare's mouth. Gridlock. Very cool concept for another dark future episode, and boy does it work. The giant traffic jam and driving for years at a time is the only hope for these people, but the Doctor gives them a much better life, and you really feel that victory. And the dynamic between Martha and the Doctor continues to get better. Daleks in Manhattan and Evolution of the Daleks. Unfortunately, this two-part episode set in America with Andrew Garfield wasn't all that great. The Daleks turn humans into pigs, and one Dalek wants a human body for some reason. And somehow this two-parter fails to make the Daleks feel like a real threat. Why do they never shoot the Doctor? Not really a good story to me. The Lazarus Experiment. All I'm going to remember about this episode is how bad the Lazarus monster looks. Those special effects are the worst in the entire show, so even Series 3 had its faults. I did like seeing Martha's family in it more though. 42. Chibnall's entrance. I cannot get into his stories. This episode immediately puts you in the action, yet it's not really entertaining. It leaves no room for real character moments, and the setting is just ugly. I would not want to spend another 42 minutes watching 42. Human Nature and the Family of Blood. One of the best stories this show has to offer. Exploring huge differences between the Doctor and humans by making the Doctor human was absolutely genius. And you really feel for John Smith and the nurse because John is his own person, but he was only created to be killed, and it's the Doctor's fault. It shows a darker side to the character and how alien he really is. Also, the Family of Blood are great villains, the tension is high throughout both episodes, and Martha's loyalty to the Doctor is highlighted more than ever here. Phenomenal story. Blink. It has so little of the Doctor, yet everyone can agree on this episode's brilliance. It introduced the greatest Doctor Who monster of all time, the Weeping Angels. It played around with time like no one except Moffat could do. It had countless twists and surprises and mind-blowing payoff for a 40-minute runtime. And it even had probably the best one-time character in the show, Sally Sparrow. Need I say more? This is a perfect episode. It does everything right. And it's always rewatchable. Utopia, The Sound of Drums, and Last of the Time Lords. This three-part finale counts as one, even though all three are pretty different from each other, and unfortunately each one gets a little bit weaker than the last. The reveal that the Master is back was incredible in Utopia, and I like the plot of him becoming Prime Minister in The Sound of Drums, but then it gets ridiculous in Last of the Time Lords. For the finale of such a solid season, it was disappointing. The ending and the way the Master is defeated just felt fake. The story was almost so good, but the last part in the series brought it down. Martha's send-off was decent, though. Voyage of the Damned. It feels off not having Rose, Martha, or Donna, but there were some okay new characters introduced. This Christmas special doubled down on the action and spectacle, and it's really only for fun, which is cool. I do prefer the other early specials more, though. A Titanic ship in space is just too fun to hate. Series 4, Episode 1, Partners in Crime. Yeah, the Adipose is a silly plot, but this is a solid start to the season. Donna is great, and so is Wilf. The new style that this episode brought was refreshing, and it might be one of the funniest episodes overall. Fun time. The Fires of Pompeii. Fantastic historical episode in Pompeii where Donna challenges the Doctor about not saving people, only to discover that the Doctor has to cause the eruption of Vesuvius, which is all incredible and effective, especially because it creates parallels to the Time War, so we see why they can't just save everyone. It's also amazing looking back to have Capaldi and Tennant in the same episode. Planet of the Ood. The Ood are likable as always, and it's satisfying to see the Doctor set them free. There aren't exactly any problems with this story, but there's not a lot to it. Absolutely a good episode, but not really top tier. The Centauran Stratagem and the Poison Sky. A pretty weak two-part story. The Centaurans aren't good villains, Martha's back only to be a clone for most of it, and there's this obnoxious kid who's on the Centauran side because he's too smart for Earth or something. This is definitely the weakest of Season 4. The Doctor's Daughter. This had some solid ideas, but felt a little bit rushed. It goes way too fast, especially at the beginning. Jenny was fine, I guess, but the ending was better if she stayed dead. So, not bad, but not awesome. The Unicorn and the Wasp. I respect the step to make this an actual murder mystery with the style of an Agatha Christie story, but it definitely wasn't my favorite. It's one that would be amazing for a certain type of audience and just okay for everyone else. Silence in the Library and Forest of the Dead solidifies Moffat as a genius and my favorite Who writer even before he became showrunner. These episodes and this story make me proud to be a fan. The concept of the monsters in the shadows is another great one. The dream world in the library and how it's shown is amazing. The entire mystery that connects both is mind-blowing, and of course the icing on all of it is River's song. This character who meets the Doctor in the wrong order makes so much sense. Not only do these episodes introduce her to us and the Doctor, they also conclude her story that we would see later in a perfect way. Time travel, weird planets and monsters, sci-fi craziness, and great character work is all in here. Incredible. Midnight. It's the 12 Angry Men of Doctor Who, with a group of unlikable people with terrible morals arguing in one room the whole time. Which sounds bad, but it's amazing. It's also in space, and it adds an element of Twilight Zone horror to the mix. It has the conclusion and fate of the Doctor come down to the regular people, and it's one of the creepiest episodes ever. Pretty great standalone. Turn Left, a horrifying episode that shows what happens if the Doctor doesn't meet Donna, and how bad the world would be if the Doctor wasn't there to save it. It's one of the best uses of the butterfly effect idea that I've ever seen. Donna becomes one of the best characters in the show with that sacrifice, and all the setup for the finale is perfectly done. This is the type of alternate reality story that I need more of. The Stolen Earth and Journey's End, the Infinity War and Endgame of the Davies era, and it's nearly as epic. Rose, Mickey, Martha, Sarah Jane, and Captain Jack are all back for the team-up. Just one little problem, I don't really care about the other teams they're part of, but it's amazing to have them all at the same time. This story was the perfect way to end Season 4 and bring it all together. The stakes are insanely high, Davros is a good villain, the victory is so satisfying, and each of the companions is treated to an important continuation of their arcs and a good ending. And then there's Donna's fate. Everything that she learned and every way that the Doctor made her better was ripped away with her memory, and the Doctor was left lonely all over again. It's a crushing ending, but one that couldn't have gone any differently. The Next Doctor. The fake-out Doctor was a good idea, but the rest is a boring Cybermen story in the 1800s. I didn't care about any of the conflict until there was a slight mention of the episodes that came before. Planet of the Dead, completely unmemorable desert adventure with a group of characters that I really don't like, especially Christina. Like, the story on paper is fine, it takes elements from other successful Who stories, but who would ever return to watch this episode again? The Waters of Mars. It's another episode about fixed point events and if the Doctor should change them, but that idea never gets old. This time the Doctor's so done with letting people die because they're supposed to, that he's determined to change history. He goes down that darker path this one time, and it's amazing to watch. That ending really hits. Also, the water monsters are great and creepy, the new group of characters work, and it's cool seeing a historical event set in our future. The End of Time. This isn't the finale of a season, this is the finale of an era. But it's not a culmination like the other finales, it's just an epic movie from the brilliance of this one story alone. It's the Master coming back, it's the Doctor waiting on his death, and it's the Time Lords trying to return, but really it's about the 10th Doctor remembering what it means to be the Doctor. Remembering that he isn't a god, that he needs people around him, and that he saves people without taking revenge or killing. A needed conclusion to his arc. Wilf was an incredible companion for this, and David Tennant's final performance will always be legendary. His regeneration gives chills because this was an era ending, and it will be remembered. Davies and Tennant can come back anytime, but this will still be their perfect victory lap conclusion. Stephen Moffat, Matt Smith, Series 5, The 11th Hour. The best opening Doctor episode ever, and it's not very close. After the heartbreaking departure of David Tennant, this episode makes you forget that there was ever any other face, because Matt Smith just is the Doctor. It transitions into a new era so flawlessly. It also introduces Amy in a creative way, and it all feels like a dreamlike fairy tale. All these changes could have turned fans away, but anyone who actually watches this will instantly be won over and hooked for the next chapter. The Beast Below. Lots of great dark sci-fi ideas in here, and a very interesting future world to learn about. The ending where Amy does the right thing when the Doctor was about to make a mistake is good too. Just some writing and continuity mistakes that bring it down. Victory of the Daleks. I like the idea of the human machine created by Daleks, but other than that, this is a very bland Dalek story with no intrigue. Daleks in World War II should have been better. The Time of Angels and Flesh and Stone. This was the follow-up to the Weeping Angels and River Song, which is actually amazing that they did both in one, but it's definitely not as good as the originals. River is still really good and it sets up a lot more to come soon, and the Angels are still the best monster, but it flips the concept of them on its head a little too much, where it's not about them sending you to the past anymore, which was the best thing about them. Still, a lot of new creative ideas in here, and it's one of the first stories I ever watched and loved. The Vampires of Venice. This is where early Series 5 was a little messy, but still not bad. Rory is fun to see more of, but the vampires who are actually fish aliens is not a memorable story, and the hints for the series arc are so unnecessary. Amy's Choice. The dream ideas are very good and something this show definitely needed. This episode does a great job at being confusing and also making Amy and Rory better characters in the process. The actual dream worlds on each side aren't that interesting, but not knowing which one is real is automatically cool. The Hungry Earth and Cold Blood. It reminds me of Planet of the Apes somehow with the premise in the lizard people. The second episode of this story is way better than the first, and Rory going into the crack in the wall was the best part. For a Chibnall story, I was surprised that there were actual stakes and characters though, so I kinda like it. Vincent and the Doctor, a fantastic portrayal of a historical figure, Vincent van Gogh, and an amazing exploration of what really could have been happening in his life through sci-fi. It also explores the question of what if someone could see the legacy they leave behind. It's a bittersweet but really impactful story and one that's very memorable. The Lodger. The Doctor plays football, and James Corden gets jealous of him, while for the entire episode they put off actually investigating what's happening above them. But hey, it's a funny episode, it's good to have a light fun time before the big finale, and I respect it. The Pandorica opens, and the Big Bang. Series 5 was the first one I watched all the way through years ago. On rewatch it was a little more shaky than I remembered, but the finale is still mind-blowing. It's exactly what Moffat as showrunner was hyped up to do. He brought his crazy time concepts into individual episodes before, but this time he was able to set it up throughout the season, and it's all brought together in this fantastic conclusion. Everything revolving around Amy's memory was great, the cracks in the universe being resolved, Rory and River getting their moments to shine, and so many scenes that get me hyped. Such a clever story all around, and these are probably the episodes that define Matt Smith's era of Doctor Who the best to me. A finale should make the whole 13-episode story feel worth it, and that's exactly what this did. A Christmas Carol. This episode really captures the feeling of Christmas and the fairy tale style of Season 5, which is great. It's a super inventive retelling of A Christmas Carol too, without being too on the nose either, and its use of the Doctor is very different. It focuses on the Scrooge of this story, Kazran Sardik, more than any of our usual main characters, making for a very different episode and one I really like. Series 6, beginning with The Impossible Astronaut and Day of the Moon. A two-part series opener was a smart move for Series 6 with how much stuff that had to be set up. The Silents are great new monsters, almost as cool as Weeping Angels. All the River Song plotlines begin, and the Doctor literally dies at the beginning of the first episode. With all the new concepts being introduced, it's the most complicated and hard to follow episode of them all. It's Moffat going all out, and I really enjoy it. The Curse of the Black Spot. For people who like pirate stories, maybe this is cool, but I hate it. It's so stupid and boring, all the acting is off, and the sci-fi reveals at the end mean nothing. The Doctor's Wife, an idea so good that was never explored before on the show, which is the TARDIS coming to life, and it works so well. It's always been her and the Doctor, and we finally get to understand that deeper. Also, there's that very memorable segment of the house villain messing with Amy and Rory, which is so creepy and suspenseful. Such a clever script in this episode. The Rebel Flesh and the Almost People. I love the idea of the Flesh doppelgangers and the moral conflict that comes with it, like if they're really people or not. I like the dark atmosphere of the episode, and all the interactions between two of the same person. It's all pretty well done. It also provided the setup for even better things to come. A good two-parter. A Good Man Goes to War. This partway series finale is just as thrilling as any, with how it concludes one little arc and starts another one. And man, this episode is near perfect. All the reveals are amazing, the Doctor's like a looming threat coming for revenge, and River's song is Amy and Rory's daughter. It's a special episode, which just proves Moffat's genius with how to weave stories. I love almost everything about this one. And then Let's Kill Hitler. Mel's was such a shoved-in plotline, which was pretty pointless. It would have been better if it was just an early River song, because it seems like Moffat went too far with how much River was interconnected in Amy and Rory's lives. Other than that, it's a solid episode, and River finding out who she'd become in the future was fantastic. Night Terrors. The dollhouse idea is actually very clever and the dolls are creepy, but everything else is pretty weak. The side characters aren't good and the plot is kinda cheap. It's a watchable episode though. The Girl Who Waited. A heartbreaking episode that shows the Doctor unaware of how badly he failed. He let Rory and Amy down even if he thinks he fixed it. The older Amy who had to wait too long was such a fantastic idea for a more serious episode. It's the best character development for these companions in their entire era, and it's about them losing faith in the Doctor. Gutsy episode, but it paid off. The God Complex. This one is slightly frustrating because the setup is so good with everyone's greatest fear in the hotel room, but it doesn't give a payoff as satisfying as it could have been. I still love the ideas in the creepy hotel setting though. Closing Time. The return of Craig was not needed. It's not as funny or fun as his first outing, and it felt like a pointless episode to fill in the season without a two-part finale. The Wedding of River Song. It's not all that mind-blowing or exciting for a finale, but that is kind of the point, because the Doctor had to convince the universe he was dead. I do love all of time happening at once, I like how it concludes the River Song series arc, and I do think it's a good finale, but a lot of the past season was more exciting than it. The Doctor, the Widow, and the Wardrobe. The tone and feeling is just as fun as Moffat's first Christmas special, but none of the good writing is there. It doesn't work once the actual story begins, but the beginning and the end of the special are really solid. Series 7, Asylum of the Daleks. The Daleks are the best they've been since their first story in the reboot series. It's an epic high-stakes episode, and the introduction of Clara or Oswin is awesome. But I hate what they did to Amy and Rory, or really just Amy. She's a selfish idiot in this, and I hate that they even thought about a divorce for such a stupid reason. That alone brings this series opener down for me. Dinosaurs on a Spaceship. It's literally dinosaurs on a spaceship. What needs to be said? It's wacky, nonsensical, epic, and fun with absolutely zero substance. I don't understand what happened, but it had dinosaurs on a spaceship, which is pretty cool, I guess. A Town Called Mercy. Doctor Who goes western, and it's actually pretty darn good. It's hard to say who to root for during the episode, but the climax gives a satisfying answer. Also, both villains are cleverly written to be different aspects of the Doctor, which is really cool. The Power of Three. An episode that really focuses on the dynamic of the iconic trio is always going to be nice. This time it's about how Amy and Roy are about ready to move on, which is sad, but it's something new and it's great. The rest of the story isn't interesting or memorable, but it's got the character development. The Angels Take Manhattan, pretty much the only episode other than Blink that uses the Weeping Angels to their full potential. The time travel concepts are amazing, and River Song's role is so interesting with the book that she'd write later. And Amy and Rory went out with one of their best episodes yet. Moffat knew that this would be the last time Amy, Rory, River, and the Doctor would be together, so he made it their best adventure. I don't get any complaints with this episode. I think it's phenomenal. The Snowmen, another good sort of introduction to Clara with some very cool scenes, but it's not a very special. It's Matt Smith's first ever episode without Amy, but it flows nicely, so I appreciate it. The Bells of St. John. It's weird how the actual first introduction of the Clara that we would come to know isn't very good at all. She only becomes interesting much later. Also, the villain of this episode is Wi-Fi controlling people and uploading them, which is just a much worse version of Cybermen stuff we've seen before. The Rings of Akaten. I like the weird outer space area and culture. I don't like most of the first half of the episode, but I really like that climax with the amazing music and the Doctor's speech. Not an incredibly memorable episode, but I do like it and wouldn't mind rewatching. Cold War. One of the most boring episodes in the entire show. There is nothing to care about throughout the entire thing. Series 7 sacrifices substance for an epic adventure, but Cold War is not epic or entertaining in any way. Hide. Finally, a proper creepy ghost story turns into an awesome time travel idea, turns into a weird alien love story ending. And honestly, it's all good. Clara gets some great moments, the horror style is awesome, and everything about the story is pretty clever. One of the highlights of Series 7. Journey to the Center of the TARDIS. Just getting to explore the wild world inside the TARDIS finally was pretty great. The story goes all over the place, but there's some awesome concepts near the end of the episode that I'd love to see more of. The Crimson Horror. I watched this episode while I was covered in the crimson horror of hives from an allergic reaction. It didn't add or detract from the already horrendous experience that is this episode, just filled with terrible ideas and a terrible story structure. Nightmare in Silver. This episode tried to up the stakes of the Cybermen, but it failed miserably. The Cybermen are still boring, and in one of Eleven's last stories ever, the writers gave him nothing to work with. What a shame. The Name of the Doctor. It wasn't looking like Series 7 was going to have any type of satisfying finale, but Moffat delivered on this one, and I actually love it. The Impossible Girl concept was fantastic and tied things together very well, and I also love River Song's part in this episode. It's her latest appearance in her timeline, and it's a beautiful ending. I love how the entire Matt Smith era and all of his finales are intertwined, and to me, The Name of the Doctor helps elevate the era, and especially the mediocre series it came from. Because of this and the two specials that came after it, Matt Smith got to go out with a bang. The Day of the Doctor. This 50th anniversary special is a gift to all Doctor Who fans. It brought my two favorite Doctors together, 10 and 11. It added a new fantastic Doctor in John Hurt, and the three of them make for the perfect fan service episode. It's also the episode and story that the entire revival series was leading up to. Going back to the Time War, the event that changed everything for the Doctor, was fantastic. Seeing each of them work out a way to fix their biggest regret was a special ending. Even the Zygon plot was solid as well. I truly believe this was the perfect anniversary episode that captures everything special about the show and gives fans the experience of a lifetime. 10 years later, it's still fantastic. The Time of the Doctor. The entire Matt Smith era ended in this episode, and it couldn't have gotten a better conclusion. Plotlines from his first ever episode are finally fully concluded in Moffat's magnum opus. Every monster, enemy, and ally that you could want serve their purpose in this epic adventure. It makes sure that you love the 11th Doctor for his final outing, which makes his regeneration so powerful. 10 and 11 both had phenomenal eras and endings, but because of this masterpiece, I think Matt Smith might edge Tennant out as my favorite Doctor. Peter Capaldi, Series 8, Deep Breath. Okay, so this one's a huge mixed bag. It's the introduction to the 12th Doctor, but it seems to try and make you hate him before telling you it's the same person all along when it absolutely wasn't. That being said, the ending where 11 calls Clara and talks to her about 12 is a phenomenal scene, and Clara is great throughout the episode. As for the main plot, it sucks. Moffat overused Strax, Vastra, and Jenny way too much, and I got so tired of them in this. The connections this story had to the girl in the fireplace could have been cool, but they didn't go anywhere with it. So like I said, mixed experience. Into the Dalek. It's got a few too many similarities to the original Dalek for me to give it a lot of credit, but at least we got to see more of what the 12th Doctor was all about, and the struggle to believe that there could ever be a good Dalek. Robot of Sherwood. The Doctor bantering with literal Robin Hood is not too awesome in my opinion. I can see how this could be a fun episode for people, but at this point we needed more from Capaldi's Doctor, and it wasn't there yet. Listen. Danny Pink is actually awful in this episode, and it is not believable that Clara would put up with him, but otherwise this episode is pretty cool. There's a lot of different settings and ideas that all connect to the main story, which is the monster under the bed that isn't really there. Classic Moffat using those childhood fears to set up an epic episode. I like it a lot. Time Heist. The mystery and setup is all perfect, but it relies on the ending twist to be effective. And those twists are okay, but really not all that exciting, and it ends feeling like it had no point. The Caretaker. I actually love an episode like this where the Doctor invades the regular life of his companion. We finally see a lot of Clara's life as a teacher, and it's much needed. Her and Danny Pink are still terrible, but at least we have the 12th Doctor interacting with them and making it fun. Kill the Moon. A fascinating episode because of the fact that the Doctor does nothing. He flees the conflict and leaves it to the humans to decide what to do about the creature hatching from the moon. I can see why people hate that, but it's all worth it when Clara hates him for it and actually stands up to his stupidity. Mummy on the Orient Express. Solid episode that really shows what 12 is all about. He's willing to play with lives a little more in order to stop the monster, which is why he's not sure if he's a good man or not. Definitely one of the essential episodes of Series 8. Flatline. Every concept and idea from this story pops and sticks in your mind. From the TARDIS shrinking to the 2D creatures coming to life through graffiti, this is a clever episode that brings the weird and feels like the good old days of the show, but also feels fresh. In the Forest of the Night. Besides the bad child acting, this honestly isn't bad. It's interesting seeing the Doctor get it all wrong yet again, and the resolution is a cool idea. That last scene of the missing girl is embarrassingly awful, though. Like, what were they thinking? Dark Water and Death in Heaven. Missy is immediately the best master in this finale. Capaldi's 12 finally truly proves himself as an amazing Doctor, and Clara is challenged more than ever with what happens to Danny. It's a great finale for character work, but the plot is also top tier. The Cybermen are finally redeemed after all their awful stories, and it's one of the Master's greatest schemes as well. To me, Series 8 has no absolute classics, but this finale is the closest to it. Last Christmas. The dream within a dream Inception concept is of course pretty good, but it wasn't as investing as it should have been. Also, bringing back Danny in a dream again felt unnecessary, and the ending is a little weird. Not a great Christmas special. Moving on to Series 9 with The Magician's Apprentice and The Witch's Familiar. This is a very good series opener that gives us the best Davros story of the revival show. It shows him and the Doctor, who have been fighting for centuries, at their most vulnerable, and the Doctor chooses to help Davros only for him to use the Doctor's compassion against him again. Missy also gets more compelling, where she almost becomes an ally, but she's always plotting evil schemes to create chaos. Amazing characters and a great series opener, but maybe didn't have to be 2 parts. Under the Lake and Before the Flood, a 2-parter that actually uses its structure in a clever way. The first part sets up the problem in a high-stakes creepy invasion story, while the second part has the Doctor go to the past to find out how it all started. Fantastic idea, and it's paid off nicely. All the new side characters are also some of the best and most interesting we've ever seen, making for an investing and well-rounded story. The Girl Who Died, for the most part a very mediocre Viking story where Clara gets nothing to do, but oh my, that scene where the 12th Doctor finally recognizes his face and remembers what it means, it's thrilling and makes the story slightly memorable. Then The Woman Who Lived. It has great themes about the torture of being immortal, but unfortunately it's paired with a terrible story with a lion dude and a lame ending. Those themes are fantastic though. The Zygon Invasion and the Zygon Inversion. I was shocked to remember just how good this 2-parter was. It truly felt like a high-stakes alien invasion movie where every moment mattered. We got Clara as a Zygon villain, and we got Osgood as a great temporary companion, which was special. But what it really comes down to is the 12th Doctor giving his all to stop a war. The idea of the Osgood boxes was brilliant because it made the perfect opportunity for the Doctor to lay out his entire motivation for who he is and why he does what he does. His speech about his mistakes, his hatred for war, and his forgiveness. It's beautiful. Spectacular story. Sleep No More. Such a jarring shift from the Zygon masterpiece to this experimental filler episode in Series 9 that it might just give you whiplash. This is the only real filler episode in the season, but it makes its worthlessness count. The found footage style was just annoying. Face the Raven. The hidden London street was a cool idea. A shielder was finally put to good use, and Clara's death scene is very impactful. She proves herself to be one of the best companions when she willingly sacrifices herself without regret. Very good episode. Heaven Sent. From the opening frame, to each and every word spoken by Capaldi, to the final scene, every moment of Heaven Sent is magic. It dives deeper into the mind of the Doctor than any other episode could try to. Blink is the show's concepts at their best, The Girl in the Fireplace is the show's themes at their best, but Heaven Sent is the show's main character, the Doctor, explored more than ever. It shows how he thinks to himself, how he interacts with mysteries, and most importantly, how he's grieving over the death of Clara. It's the most emotionally fueled episode of them all. Then it also uses the insane world of the confession dial, the ideas sprinkled throughout the episode, and an eternity of time to craft the most incredibly woven story and greatest payoff ever. The Doctor was willing to sacrifice himself billions of times over and be stuck there for billions of years just to keep a secret and for a chance to save Clara. All of that makes for the best episode possible in the history of Doctor Who. Hell Bent. Controversy alert. So the Time Lords are finally fully back and not much happens involving them. That's true. But what Moffat chose to focus on instead was fantastic anyway. The ending for Clara is well earned. The Doctor broke the rules for her, but she's even stronger than he is, because she's okay with dying. The Doctor having to forget her is also so sad because of everything Clara has done for him. All of that was a great ending to their story together. The series arc isn't that interesting with the hybrid, but Series 9 gets these characters and explores them incredibly deeply, and that continues in Hellbent. To me, it doesn't undermine Face the Raven or anything that came before, it makes it better. The Husbands of River Song. Most of the story is just decent Christmas fun, but everything between Capaldi's Doctor and River is awesome. Their chemistry is great, River not recognizing him leads to some hilarious scenes, and the ending on Beryllium is beautiful. Their story together finally reaches its peak where they both know each other very well, and it was the right way to end it. The Return of Dr. Mysterio. It feels like a crossover between a lame superhero show and Doctor Who, except there's not enough Doctor Who. It really doesn't fit in with anything else in the show until the last 2 minutes when they mention River Song. Series 10. The Pilot. This era gets a fresh start with Bill, and it's a pretty fun time. I like the Doctor being a professor, and both Nardole and Bill are good. All the places they go in the TARDIS make the show feel new again, and I appreciate it. The puddle monster is a little weird, though. Smile. This episode immediately drops the charm from the pilot and goes on a much less creative adventure with killer emoji bots. It's also like the healing nanotech from the Empty Child story, but not as cool. Thin Ice. Bill learning about time travel is fun, but when she's questioning the Doctor on his morals, it's even better. This episode broke the ice on 12 and Bill's dynamic, pun intended. It's the one that won me over for the rest of the season. The actual creature under the ice story is alright as well. Knock Knock. I remember loving this episode for the living wooden house and all the fun new characters, but it wasn't as good as I thought. It does have some great ideas, but the reasoning behind why the plot is happening was just stupid and didn't work for me. And Oxygen. It's not as clever as it thinks it is. The Doctor's just unlikable, and the plot is boring until the Doctor goes blind. Nardole is actually the best thing about this episode. Extremis. The first part of the Monk trilogy is the only one that's worth the time. The simulation plot works well with a creative and thrilling way of revealing it, and the idea of the Veritas is a fascinating mystery. I like this one. The Pyramid at the End of the World. Why is this so boring? The monks have nothing to do with what they were in the previous episode, and nothing interesting happens. It's a setup episode, but it's also just its own story, and it's so pointless. The Lie of the Land. The monks brainwashing the world is a good idea, but that's about it. This story just felt so distracted at times. A lot of talking happens with Bill or Missy without actually exploring the potential of the monks as villains. This trilogy took up way too much of Series 10, and it really brings it down in my opinion. Empress of Mars. The combination of an outer space monster like the Ice Warriors with 19th century British soldiers somehow works pretty well. It doesn't add a whole lot new to the table with its plot, and the new characters are wonky, but it's more enjoyable and memorable than some in Series 10. The Eaters of Light. It's actually a lot like Empress of Mars with a weird alien creature and some soldiers from the past, but I think this episode was a lot more lively. The environment made it feel more real, and the new characters were actually decent. The monster and the resolution were well thought out, and I was hooked during it all. World Enough in Time and The Doctor Falls. This story is constantly hitting you with insane ideas and reveals, and it all comes together as a fantastic finale and a tragic loss for everyone. Bill dies because the Doctor trusted Missy too much. Then she lives 10 years waiting for the Doctor, while it's only minutes for him. The Cybermen are starting over again because it's the only way to survive on the ship. The Master is struggling with wanting to stand beside the Doctor, but she's stopped by who she used to be, literally, and Bill is turned into a Cyberman. All of that makes for Bill's best story by far, the best Cyberman story ever, and of course the best Master story, all in one. Everything goes wrong for the Doctor while he's only trying to be kind. Absolutely fantastic story, and makes Series 10 worth it. Twice Upon a Time. Knowing that this is Moffat's and Capaldi's last episode, it's surprising to see the approach to the story. It's not an epic conclusion, it doesn't really have a villain, and the stakes aren't very high. It's more of an epilogue, and it works for that purpose. It's a very interesting premise of the Doctor not wanting to change again out of fear that he might get it wrong, and the way that the first Doctor adds to that idea is kind of genius. This was Moffat and Capaldi saying goodbye and hoping that the Doctor would stay the hero he always should be, and that's a nice way to end their respective runs. It's just a shame it seems like the 13th Doctor didn't listen to 12's final speech. Jodie Whittaker, Series 11, The Woman Who Fell to Earth. What was set up in this really isn't that bad, it's just that Chibnall forgot about everything he set up later on. The new Doctor is okay in her first episode, but she does seem to be impersonating 10 instead of finding her own personality, and the problems that haunt this whole era are evident here. Too many companions and they all suck, the dialogue is trash, and it takes itself a little too seriously. The Ghost Monument, and it all goes downhill from here. The 13th Doctor is so obnoxious in this episode, which is a real problem when it's supposed to prove her as a good character at the beginning of her era. The only good part is the TARDIS coming back. Rosa. I guess it honors Rosa Parks in an interesting way, but it's still bad because the Doctor and the companions really have nothing to do with the story. Their job was to stop another time traveler from messing up history, and then by the end we get the Doctor preaching about what we're supposed to have learned. This simply isn't the same TV show. Arachnids in the UK. At least Love and Monsters is self-aware, but this episode is disgustingly bad, and the team behind it doesn't seem to notice or care. The Doctor would rather let the spiders suffocate than shoot them to give them mercy. There is no understanding of the character or show present here. The Saranga Conundrum. There's only 10 episodes in the season, yet they couldn't avoid making the worst content on Earth. The villain is a little nugget alien, the episode is set in the most boring-looking ship, and every line of dialogue is truly atrocious. Demons of the Punjab. Yaz finally gets more focus, but wow, this story is terrible. Why did they write themselves into a corner like this? Once again, the Doctor and the three companions do literally nothing, because either they let this guy die, or they prevent Yaz from existing by saving him. So they stand around and wait for him to die, and that's how it ends. Kerblam. First in a while that isn't embarrassingly bad, but it's just boring. The new setting of this bland workshop run by robots is unexciting, and that twist villain is so bad. The fundamentals of the show are still missing, like the companions actually finding something to do. The Witchfinders. The dullest possible retelling of the witch trials turns into the dullest possible alien invasion with living mud. It just keeps drudging on without an ounce of creativity. It takes you away. This is actually a well-rounded episode with real character work, a weird story, and actual creativity. The idea of the mirror into another world is great, and the ending with the frog is a little over the top, but I forgive it. This is also Graham's best episode since he finally gets character moments with the return of Grace in the mirror world. Solid episode. Then the Battle of Ranskor Avkolos. Who knew that the finale of a season with no overarching story would be absolutely terrible? This is just a miserable chore to watch. I couldn't care less about these characters, this setting, this story. It caps off this pathetic season quite well. Resolution. A returning villain is finally brought into the new era, but they're completely mistreated. It's the worst Dalek story so far. Every new idea, like the redesign and the Dalek controlling human, is so bad. The only redeeming part is the actually good conversation between Ryan and his dad. Series 12, starting with Spyfall. There's plenty to enjoy in this 2-hour series opener. It's action-packed and more exciting than anything in this era, and the TARDIS team feels more real now. It's also very frustrating, though, because it all seems like a desperate attempt to get a gasp out of the audience. How did they get so creatively bankrupt that we have Gallifrey being burned again by the Master this time? It's pathetic, but I have to admit for a lot of this story, I am entertained. Orphan 55. If you think anything you've ever watched is bad, it's nothing compared to Orphan 55. This is the only episode worthy of a 0 out of 10. Every character is horrendous, every line of dialogue is hilariously bad, every motivation is nonsense, every frame and scene is ugly, and the twist that the planet is Earth just tops it off. They really think they're being smart, but this feels like it was trying to be the worst content anyone has ever known. And it succeeds. Nikola Tesla's Night of Terror. It's better than Rosa, at least. It's still a bit too preachy about how Tesla changed the world and everything, but at least the Doctor has something real to do this time, and it feels like Doctor Who, at least a little bit. Still not great. Fugitive of the Jadoon. I have to come to terms with the fact that I like this episode. It's a really fun time with the Jadoon, the story with Ruth, and a little bit of Captain Jack in here. It's just unfortunate it's all overshadowed by the start of the worst idea in the show's history, the Timeless Child. The Ruth Doctor would be so good if she wasn't a past incarnation, but it is infuriating looking back. The score that I'm giving this is ignoring everything that comes after, because this episode on its own is a lot of fun. Praxeus. After some promising stuff, Praxeus reverts back to the Series 11 style of things. This is a dull, boring, annoying episode with some bad new characters, and the TARDIS team is terrible again. Absolutely skip this one. Can you hear me? I really admire how hard this one tries to be good. It's impressively creepy, every part of the story is interesting, and it gives us so much more to care about the companions. The dreams that the villain forces them to have reveal more about them. This episode also shows how traveling with the Doctor messes up their personal lives. It's all well done, so I think this is the best of the era so far. The Haunting of Villa Diodati. Don't really care. On to the next one. For real though, this one is so aggressively mid that it almost becomes bad. It doesn't use the potential of the era it's set in, or the villain of the half-Cyberman dude. It's not a frustrating or bad episode, it's just forgettable. Ascension of the Cybermen and the Timeless Children. Absolutely sickening to watch this abomination again. The first part isn't awful, but the Timeless Children is just gross. It tears apart the entire 60-year history of the show for no reason. It doesn't add anything new to the character, it only takes away all the meaningful arcs we've witnessed before on the show. To say that the Doctor is this incredibly important, special, valuable being from the moment they existed, it cheapens everything he's ever done. And it was all revealed for no payoff and in the worst way possible. Was it really worth it to get a big reaction? Was it worth it, Chibnall, to tear apart 60 years of world building in one episode? Again, truly sickening. Revolution of the Daleks. It's too much of a sequel to Resolution to have a chance. I think it is a little better though, just because of Jack, who once again is the best part of the episode. Oh, you know what? Ryan and Graham's ending is really good. The actual Dalek story is garbage though. Down to the last season, Series 13 Flux, starting with the Halloween Apocalypse. It sets up some potentially interesting things, but as its own story, it's overly ambitious and doesn't really make sense. I don't really care about Dan or Carvanista, but I am interested to see what's next. War of the Centaurans. This one's slightly more focused, but the Centaurans are still not good villains, and the 3 different locations in the episode don't really add to each other like they should. The Flux plot also proves itself to be another borrowed idea, where it rewrites history in random ways. Kind of frustrating. Once Upon Time. This feels like a scattered Moffat story, and it's confusing in a great way. It's very refreshing after the last few seasons. The way the time storm is presented is exciting and fun to learn about, and Jodie Whittaker finally seems comfortable in the role as the Doctor. I'm impressed. Village of the Angels. Any episode with the Weeping Angels is going to be incredibly tense, and this one's no different. It combines all the ideas Moffat had for them and also adds great new ones to the mix for a very satisfying story. It's surprising how consistently good this is with the rest of the Angel stories. Everything about this episode works. It's a new high for the Chibnall era. Survivors of the Flux. It's getting repetitive having Dan and Yaz completely separated from the Doctor, because it feels like Dan still doesn't even know her at this point. Tech-Tayun is in this episode without much of a purpose, but then there's the Great Serpent villain, who's actually great. This huge story isn't reaching its full potential, though. The Vanquishers. Yeah, as an ending to a huge 6-episode story with all these great ideas and all these villains, you need a better way to tie it all up than this. I wish I could say Series 6 is a big improvement, but the best thing I can say is that it's not infuriating like the last 2. I don't dislike the episode, but it was definitely too complicated for its own good. Eve of the Daleks. It's a Groundhog Day time loop story, but it's so bad. I genuinely hate every bit of character work in this. It's another wasted Dalek story. Legend of the Sea Devils. This one just shouldn't have been made. Hopefully in a few years we'll all forget that this episode exists. The Sea Devils get the least interesting villain introduction of all time, and I can't even remember how it concluded. And finally, The Power of the Doctor. All things considered, this episode is pretty bad. The Master's plan makes no sense, everything about the plot is just lame, but the past companions and Doctors make for some good fan service, and the whole regeneration sequence is well done. It's the weakest one of the revival show, but it's still the best and most heartfelt scene of the entire Whittaker era. And now we have better things to come. So, if you're still watching, you just watched me review 150 Doctor Who episodes. We just went through every single one. Probably took over an hour. I don't know yet because I haven't edited yet. But now, it's time for the ultimate ranking. Every episode that I just reviewed, we're putting it in one giant ranking from 1 Fireplace, and number 1, Heaven Sent. It's finally over. We ranked and reviewed every single episode of the revival show of Doctor Who, but now you can get back to regular life. But really, thanks for watching. See you in the next one.